July 7, 1968, 2:17 p.m., Abyssinian Baptist Church, Harlem. The air was thick with incense and grief. Bumpy Johnson's casket sat under stained glass windows, draped in white roses. Over 3,000 people packed the pews. Politicians, preachers, hustlers, numbers runners. But every mobster in that room, every single one, had their eyes locked on one man, Frank Lucas, standing 6 feet back from the casket, wearing a $50,000 chinchilla fur coat, Bumpy's chinchilla. The coat Bumpy never let anyone touch. The coat that symbolized 15 years of untouchable power in Harlem. Frank wore it like a crown. In front of the Genovese family, the Lucchese crew, the Columbos, in front of cops, feds, reporters. He didn't ask permission. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, silent, smooth, untouchable. The history books will tell you Frank Lucas was Bumpy's driver, a nobody, a country boy from North Carolina who got lucky. But what the world didn't know was that Frank had a plan nobody saw coming. Let's rewind. 1946, Harlem was a kingdom, and Bumpy Johnson was its king. He controlled the numbers, the policy, the heroin flow from the Italian suppliers. But here's the thing. Bumpy didn't own the product. The Italians did. The 5 families controlled every kilo that came into New York through the French connection. They charged Bumpy $40,000 per kilo, cut it 4, 5, 6 times. By the time it hit the street, the purity was 12%, maybe 15 if you were lucky. Bumpy moved millions, but the Italians, they moved billions. Frank Lucas watched. He drove Bumpy to meetings, carried his bags, kept his mouth shut. But Frank wasn't just watching, he was studying. He saw how the Italians taxed every black dealer in Harlem. He saw how the French connection controlled every shipment from Marseille. He saw the bottleneck, and he saw the opportunity. Bumpy told him once, "The loud man dies, Frank. The silent man, he lives." Frank never forgot that. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, he didn't panic. He just absorbed. By 1968, Frank had been Bumpy's shadow for 15 years. People called him the driver, the errand boy, the help. Frank let them, because while they dismissed him, he was mapping out the entire supply chain, every port, every connection, every weak link. Bumpy died of a heart attack on July 7, 1968, at a restaurant table. Playing checkers. Just gone. The streets expected chaos. They expected the Italians to swoop in and carve up Bumpy's empire like Thanksgiving turkey. But Frank walked into that funeral wearing Bumpy's coat and sent a message louder than any bullet ever could. If you're already hooked on how Frank outsmarted the most dangerous men in New York, hit that subscribe button right now. What happens next changed history forever. Within 3 weeks of Bumpy's death, Frank made a move nobody saw coming. He didn't fight the Italians. He didn't negotiate. He bypassed them entirely. Frank flew to Bangkok, then to Saigon, Vietnam. 1968, the war was raging. American soldiers were dying by the thousands, and heroin was everywhere. The Golden Triangle, Laos, Thailand, Burma, was producing the purest smack on the planet. 98% pure. The Italians were paying the Corsican mob in Marseille to refine opium into heroin, then smuggling it through French ports into New York. It cost them 40 grand per kilo by the time it hit the States. Frank cut out the middleman. He went straight to the source, met with suppliers in the jungles of Thailand, negotiated directly with producers in Burma, bought uncut heroin, not 40,000 per kilo, 4,000. He didn't stop there. Frank had a cousin in the U.S. Air Force. Military transport planes were flying back from Vietnam every single day, loaded with body bags, coffins, dead American soldiers coming home. Nobody searched those planes. Nobody dared. Frank started smuggling heroin inside the coffins, hidden in the body bags, sealed in false-bottom caskets. The feds never checked. How could they? These were American heroes. By 1969, Frank Lucas was moving 100 kilos a month into New York, 98% pure. He called it blue magic. He sold it for cheaper than the Italians. But because it was 10 times stronger, users only needed a fraction of what they used before. Frank's profit margins were insane. He made $1 million, then 5, then 10, every week. And the Italians? They had no idea where it was coming from. But Frank had a problem. The 5 families weren't stupid. They noticed Harlem dealers were buying from someone new. They noticed their own profits drying up, and they started asking questions. Vincent the Chin Gigante sent word, "Meet, sit down, explain." This was the test. The Italians ran New York. They controlled the unions, the docks, the politicians, the cops. You didn't just start your own operation, not unless you wanted to end up in the Hudson River with concrete boots. But Frank didn't panic. He didn't run. He walked into that sit-down at a social club in Little Italy, alone, no crew, no backup, no gun, just a briefcase. Gigante sat across from him, flanked by 6 made men. "You're moving product in Harlem," Gigante said. Frank nodded. "Our product." Frank shook his head. "No, mine." Gigante leaned forward. "You think you can just cut us out?" Frank opened the briefcase, pulled out a brick of blue magic, placed it on the table. "Taste it," Frank said. Gigante's men looked at each other. One of them cut into the brick, tested it. His eyes went wide. 98%, Frank said. "Uncut. Straight from the source." Gigante stared. "You're selling this for half what we charge." Frank nodded. "And making 10 times what you make." Silence. Then Gigante did something nobody expected. He laughed. Not out of amusement, out of respect. "You got balls, Frank. I'll give you that." Frank stood. "I'm not here to step on your toes. I'm here to run Harlem. You run Little Italy. We stay out of each other's way." Gigante didn't agree, but he didn't kill him either. And in that world, that was the same thing. By 1971, Frank Lucas was untouchable. He owned Harlem. He had cops on payroll, judges in his pocket, politicians taking envelopes. He bought his mother a mansion in New Jersey. He bought himself a fleet of custom cars. He walked into nightclubs wearing mink coats and $10,000 suits. He didn't hide. He flaunted. And that was his biggest mistake. Because while Frank was living like Harlem royalty, someone was watching. Detective Richie Roberts, Newark Police, Narcotics Division. Roberts was a Boy Scout. Didn't take bribes. Didn't look the other way. He was investigating the heroin epidemic tearing through New York and New Jersey. And he kept hearing one name. Frank Lucas. But nobody could touch him. Frank was too smart, too careful. He never touched the product himself. Never made direct deals. He had layers, buffers, cutouts. But Roberts was patient. He built a task force. Federal agents, DEA, NYPD. They wiretapped Frank's phones, followed his crew, tracked his money. For 2 years, they watched, waited. And then, in 1975, they found the opening. Frank's cousin, the one smuggling heroin through military coffins, got sloppy. Left a paper trail. The feds traced it back. Raided Frank's operation. Seized kilos, cash, records, and arrested Frank Lucas on January 28, 1975. The king of Harlem. Wearing a $12,000 suit, handcuffed in front of the cameras, Frank faced life in prison. 70 years. But Frank didn't go down quiet. He made a deal, turned informant, gave up corrupt cops, dirty agents, crooked politicians, over 50 convictions. Some say he betrayed the code. Some say he did what he had to do. Either way, Frank walked out in 1981, lived quietly in New Jersey. Died in 2019, 88 years old. He didn't just break the rules, he created new ones. And for 7 years, he lived like a god.